Now, from NATO headquarters, as the General said, NATO is now running Operation Unified Protector, both at sea and over Libya. And last night, of course, allies confirmed their commitment to see NATO take on all military aspects of the United Nations mandate under the Security Council Resolution 1973. Every ally is contributing either directly or indirectly with pilots, staff officers, technicians, advisors throughout the chain of command, including here at NATO headquarters. And as you've heard from the General, allies and partners are still in the process of transferring authority for their forces to participate under NATO command for all operations. We expect to have a clear picture of who is committing forces in the coming days. What is already clear is that NATO has reacted with remarkable speed. In just over a week, we've launched all 3 operations in support of the UN resolution, the arms embargo, the no-fly zone, and the protection of civilians under a single command. The Secretary General will go to London tomorrow to attend the conference on Libya. He welcomes the conference. He expects it to provide an overall political framework for the efforts of the international community in support of the United Nations resolution. From the start of this crisis, NATO has made clear that it's playing its role as part of these broad international efforts. That is what we'll continue to do in close coordination and consultation with our partners in the region and internationally. Group Captain Jeffrey Booth from the NATO International Military Staff is here with us again, and both of us will answer your questions, should you have any.
Swiss Radio Television, Thomas Miglierina. A question that I wanted to ask to Naples. If, as it seems, the rebels gain the upper hand, and that results in threat to civilian population on the Gaddafi side, does NATO have a mandate to intervene? Perhaps academical question. And can you detail the contribution of Germany and confirm that Germany has no ships taking part in the Unified Protector operation? Thank you.
Thomas, as we said, NATO is enforcing the United Nations mandate. That mandate is clear: to protect civilians and civilian populated areas from the threat of attack. And NATO is authorized under that UN resolution to take all necessary measures to protect civilians from the threat of attack. We won't go into the rules of engagement, but I think what is clear is that what started the international community in its efforts to support the people of Libya were the systematic attacks by Colonel Gaddafi on his own people. The fact that you've seen the shelling of city centers with heavy artillery, the outrageous violence that we've seen from the authorities against unarmed protesters. That is how this all started, and we have to remember that. On Germany, as I said, all allies, all 28, are participating either directly or indirectly. In the next few days, we'll be able to give you a clearer picture of the transfer of authority of assets from nations over to NATO. David.
Yes, David Brunstrom from Reuters. Could you tell us how long it is anticipated this mission will last? And also, if the mission is to protect population centers, if you had a situation where rebel forces started firing weapons into population centers and were thereby endangering them, what would NATO's response be to that? I note that the Secretary General's statement and your statement just then has emphasized attacks by preventing attacks by Gaddafi's forces. Well, what happens if there are attacks by rebel forces?
In terms of the duration of the operation, obviously, I think everybody is hoping that this operation will be as short as possible. It's clear to everyone that there is no purely military solution to the crisis in Libya. So what we hope and expect is that there will be a cessation of violence and that there will be a peaceful solution to the crisis, a transition to democracy, which is what the people of Libya want. As for your second question, as I said, the UN mandate is NATO's mandate, no more, no less, and that is what NATO forces will be implementing in this operation.
What does that say? Is it actually an impartial say? I mean, the question is, if the rebels threaten civilians, how does NATO respond to them? Will it attack rebel positions?
Well, that's a hypothetical question. We're not going to go into details of the rules of engagement. The 28 allies last night agreed on those rules of engagement, on the broad framework for this operation, and we then leave it to operational commanders on the ground to direct operations day to day.
Oana, tomorrow the Secretary General is going to London. Is going to provide ideas to the general discussion, or just to hear and to take into account what is decided over there? Thank you.
Can you just repeat that?
Is he taking initiatives, offering ideas, or just in the listening mood to take from there what is being said there in order to operate in the future? Thank you.
As I said, the Secretary General welcomes the international conference in support of Libya in London, which will bring together all NATO members, all the key international and regional actors. And what he expects this conference to provide is the broad international framework to implement all aspects of the UN Security Council Resolution 1973. Of course, we are not talking just about the military aspects that are under NATO command and control. I think he will want to focus in particular on the fact that NATO is acting as part of the global efforts to support Libya, that we have tried and tested mechanisms to work with partners in the region. NATO has long-standing relations with many countries in the region, and we have the arrangements to involve them closely in our operations, as we are already doing in several operations.
Oana Kai from German television ZDF. You talked of an overall political framework that should be developed tomorrow. Can you give us an idea which subjects, which topics are discussed? For example, whether the board that is coming together tomorrow would like to get rid of Gaddafi, or how would that happen, or what is discussed? And then I think one decision is that NATO is in charge for the military thing, and then there is a board of political decisions. Can you give us an idea how this division can work?
Well, I think for the rundown of the agenda, you have to speak to the organizers of the conference. For us, the clear mandate provided by the UN Security Council resolution is the protection of civilians in Libya. The future of Libya is not in NATO's hands. The future of Libya is in the hands of the people of Libya. And I think that is clear for everybody. In terms of how this framework could work, I think what is clear is that we expect this conference to provide broad political lines to ensure that there is momentum for a peaceful process on the ground in Libya, for a peaceful solution. Obviously, the NATO Council, the North Atlantic Council, remains in political control of the direction of day-to-day military operations in close coordination and consultation, as I said, with our partners in the region and nations contributing to this operation. This is not new for NATO. If you think back to the 1990s in the Balkans, we had, for instance, a Peace Implementation Council for Bosnia. So that is one possible mechanism that you can think of in terms of a possible precedent. Obviously, we'll have to see what is actually decided in London until we see that framework. We can only speculate.
Sorry, Hans de Bruin, ANP Netherlands. More or less operational question. Who will decide on what forces will be used for what specific purpose? Because I'm asking this, the Dutch government has said that it will only send F-16 aircraft to enforce the no-fly zone and not for attacks on ground targets. Is that the distinction from an operational point of view that can be made?
Yes, it is. It's one of the things within the forces that they're declared, and in most NATO operations you will find that there can be, as we term, national caveats. So if there's things within the operation that they can or cannot do, in the case of the Netherlands F-16s, if they've been cleared for air-to-air operations only, that's where they will feature on the air tasking order, and only that.
Nawab Khan from the Kuwait News Agency. Which non-NATO countries have offered to contribute to the NATO mission till now? Thank you.
I can't give you any specific names. It's up to those countries to announce themselves, but I can tell you that the Secretary General and his staff have been in close contact with many nations and organizations across the region, and we're confident that several of them will participate in this NATO-led operation.
Chantal Monet, RTL Belgium. So the threat on the civilians comes clearly from Gaddafi. So can we conclude that NATO will stay until Gaddafi is gone?
As I said, the future of Libya is in the hands of the people of Libya. It's for them to decide what happens with the leadership of their country. It's not for us to decide. As for the implementation of the UN Security Council resolution, that is quite clear. It refers to attacks on civilians and protecting civilians from all attacks, and NATO will apply that resolution in an impartial way.
Nordin Fridi from Al Arabiya News Channel. Could we understand that NATO, on the humanitarian side, that NATO will deploy troops, let's say, in Benghazi or in any other area that may need humanitarian assistance, whether it is medical or food, etc., or does NATO leave that for humanitarian organization and European Union?
As I understand the UN Security Council resolution 1973, there's going to be no presence on the ground. The Security Council resolution explicitly refers to the fact that there's going to be no foreign military intervention on the ground.
Dmitry Shkurko, National News Agency of Ukraine. Just short follow-up on the partners' participations. Will the partnerships taking part in active endeavor involved in embargo operations around Libya? Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's up to them, but obviously these are different operations. Active endeavor is a different operation from Operation Unified Protector. Ana.
Thank you. Ana Pisonero from the Spanish news agency Europa Press. We understand that the most sensitive for NATO to take over the whole spectrum of operations in Libya were the special attacks, targeted military attacks on the ground. So inside, without going too much into detail in the rules of engagement, but do you have any provisions that you will limit even more their use, and in which conditions you recur to them? I mean, you know, not just because we see a tank moving towards, but that you actually see a tank maybe firing a missile against a populated area. Will you be more limited in these kind of operations? Because I understand that Turkey was the NATO member state that had most problems with this, to accept this. Thank you.
As usual, we can't go into the details of the rules of engagement. As I said, all 28 allies last night agreed to the rules of engagement and agreed to the framework for this operation, and we will leave it to operational commanders on the ground to direct military operations on a day-to-day basis. Jeffrey?
I've nothing to add to that. That's where we are.
Laurent Thomé with Agence France Presse. So, for now, any of the strikes on troops on the ground, can we say that it's NATO strikes, or are we still talking about the coalition? And is the NAC actually in political control now, or are we still waiting for the transition to end for that?
As we've heard from General Bouchard just now, obviously that transition is underway. Nations are assigning assets to NATO authority as we speak. But I think, on average, that transition is not instantaneous. It's a phased transition that is expected to take place over a couple of days.
As it stands at the moment, my understanding would be is that because General Bouchard has not actively taken control of all aspects, NATO is only enforcing the no-fly zone at the moment, so any attacks that are being done on ground assets at the moment are coalition operations, not NATO.
BBC?
Hi, Matt Cole, BBC. Are you able to expand a little bit, please, on how many of the partners in this have put caveats in, for example, those who explicitly said they would not attack ground targets? We hear that the Netherlands perhaps will only take part in the no-fly zone. How many have put caveats in, and what are they?
At the moment, I don't have that specific detail. I've not seen what nations are. I mean, it's not unusual for nations to have certain restrictions on within their operations. I know that the Netherlands have said air-to-air, but I haven't seen any details of if there's been restrictions from any other nations.
Over there?
Christopher Ziedler from the Stuttgarter Zeitung in Germany. Two questions, if I may. The first, you spoke of indirect engagement of some member countries, obviously Germany. Could you say what you mean by this indirect engagement? And secondly, has there been any sort of guarantee by the so far coalition forces that there won't be parallel military action by the coalition once NATO has taken over?
Well, as I say, the 28 allies agreed last night to launch this operation. As we speak, they are transferring national assets to the control of command and control of NATO. We'll have to see what exactly is the contribution from each ally over the next few days. And your second question was?
Well, on if there was some kind of guarantee that there will, I mean, taking over doesn't necessarily mean that up till now coalition member could say, well, we need additional military action here and there, and so is there a guarantee that there will be definitely no further separate action by the coalition?
I think that's clarity after last night's decision that the operation in Libya will be under the single command and control of NATO. It will be a single operation under unitary command.
Natalia Kichigina, newspaper 2000 Ukraine. Follow up on my colleague's question. Have any of the NATO partner countries participating in the Atalanta in active endeavor, stated explicitly that they're not going to send their ships to partake in the embargo operation?
As I said before, these are two different operations. Active endeavor is an anti-terrorist operation in the Mediterranean launched after the 9/11 attacks. Unified Protector is an operation that has just been launched under the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1973. So these are two different operations with a different set of contributing partners. As for the countries, partner nations who will want to take part in Unified Protector, I will leave it to them to announce that participation. Al Jazeera.
I'm going to have one final stab at this question. I understand your reluctance to divulge operational details or go into the rules of engagement, but there is a clear hypothetical accepted danger here that the rules that you've set for yourself to protect civilians means effectively you create a stalemate in Libya, which could go on for some time. Now, it would be at least reassuring if you can tell us whether or not that particular outcome has at least been considered by the alliance, by the 28 members, and how seriously you are actually planning for that potential outcome.
Well, what we've been planning for is for all eventualities and for the full implementation of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1973. That has been the clear, strong appeal from the international community, from the Arab League, from others around the region to support the people of Libya and to protect them against attacks. The hope is, as I said, that we will see a cessation of violence sooner rather than later, because there is no military solution to this crisis in Libya as elsewhere in the region. There can only be a political solution, and we hope that the London conference will also contribute to showing the way ahead. One last question here.
Sorry if I take the floor again. Was it from behind?
It was from behind, actually.
Well, one last and obvious question. Are there any certain criteria for the end of this operation, so that what should be reached allows to decide, okay, we stop here and we withdraw? Thanks.
Well, the mission goal is that we should see the full implementation of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1973. Thank you very much.